So I want to thank you all for coming. My name is Michael Music. I'm the president of Baldor Specialty Foods. I have an honor to be up here at this panel. This is the last discussion panel for the day at the Baldor Bite event. Today's topic is really the changing evolution of food in the New York City market. And I can tell you, Baldor is a 22-year-old company, started with a van, and we're now 1,000 employees and 200 trucks in 3 locations. So we've watched a lot of the change and hopefully supported a lot of the men and women in the industry. So I'd like to just introduce everybody. At the end, we have Chef Alfred Patali, chef, proprietor, entrepreneur of the iconic Gotham Bar and Grill in New York City. Drew Nearport, with over 35 restaurants in his stable, probably one of the first people to be labeled as bi-coastal, with Budokan in both New York and San Francisco.
Nobu.
Nobu, excuse me.
Budokan is that Philadelphia restaurateur.
We have Jeff Zalaznik, which is really now growing up in New York City. And by the way, we have a CIA graduate, a Cornell graduate. Jeff is also a Cornell graduate, growing up in New York City in the banking industry, and now has dived into the restaurant scene with the major food group with Parm, Carbone, ZZ, and I don't know what's next.
We got a few.
Welcome.
Thank you.
And of course, we have Mario Carbone, which one of the names of the restaurants is named after New York City young man, CIA graduate, and myself a CIA graduate. So I think we outnumber the Cornells.
You do.
All right.
But also,
we're bigger though.
But they're smarter.
I know, that's all right. We're faster. So welcome to the panel, and I'd like to start it off with a general question for anyone ad hoc. Just because of the name of the panel discussion is New York City and its evolution over the last 20-odd years. Some of you are younger than the others. What has any of you seen highlighted in the changes in New York City in the dining?
Well, a lot has changed. Gotham is celebrating its 30th anniversary this year, and I think while I could go on and on about all the different changes, important changes that have taken place in the city in the last 30 years, I kind of think about 2. One is ingredients. 30 years ago, we didn't have nearly the array of ingredients that we have today. And good cooking, a good dish always starts with a top ingredient. But I think the thing that really is one of the most compelling is that it's the customer has changed over the 30 years. The customer today is much more sophisticated, knowledgeable, demanding, interested. It's a real pleasure, I think, to see that.
Well, I go back to the 60s because my father worked for the State Liquor Authority licensing restaurants. So I got into the restaurant business because my father had a way of taking the application from the bottom of the pile onto the top of the pile. And the people who operated restaurants in the 60s were, it's that expression, right off the boat. They were authentic immigrants. So when they opened an Italian restaurant or a French restaurant or a German restaurant or a Chinese restaurant, they didn't really know how to guide their way through the labyrinth of, the liquor authority, for instance. So I had the exposure in the 60s of seeing these amazingly authentic restaurants. But that doesn't mean they were good. And to a certain degree, a lot of these restaurants, especially the French restaurants, created facades. They were expensive. They made you feel you were intimidated when you went to a lot of the French restaurants, and they hid behind this sort of grandeur of haute cuisine. And then when I graduated from college, I actually worked in a lot of these restaurants. And in the 80s, I made a decision that if I ever opened my own restaurant, I'd strip away all that BS, serve the best food that I could possibly serve, and charge the least I could possibly charge. So in 1985, April, this month, a couple of days ago, we would have celebrated 29 years of Montrachet with David Boulay. I opened a restaurant called Montrachet, charging $16 for dinner. That's for 3 courses, 1, 6. And arguably, we changed a lot about what dining was about back in the 80s. So now, fast forward 30 years, it's almost like generationally, my customers are either dead or they've moved out of New York because now it's like 29 years later. And there's a whole new mindset, there's a whole new approach, there's a whole new way of doing business in New York. Now, mind you, I've opened other restaurants, a small one called Nobu, which is going to celebrate 20 years come August. But anyway, the point is that what Alfred said is very applicable, except that generationally, there's a whole other generation that's learning about how to eat out in restaurants in New York. The good news is that we raised the bar. We took a lot of these restaurants and we made them much more accessible, much more approachable, much more honest. And I think it's up to this generation now to continue in that, making that kind of progress.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I was going to reference that because I think that, you know, the trend that Drew started really with Montrachet of the casualizing of fine dining and what that meant is really what's kind of carried on into our generation as how do you make people comfortable in restaurants in this day and age? Because the places that, you know, back, you know, the time Drew's talking about with the old French restaurants and everything else, that environment doesn't work anymore. And it's really because, as Alfred talked about, the change of the customer and the change of the perception and the change of the perception of what fine dining is. And really, the biggest change, I think, has become layered onto that, which is a focus more and more and more on the food and on the chef, more than it's ever been. And that, you know, partially is because of the products and partially because of the times and partially because of television and the fact that everyone is now, the customer is much more educated about chefs and about dining and about what is going on the plate. So I think that, you know, what we've had the opportunity to do is focus most on that while at the same time trying to create experiences that are, you know, friendly and casual, but maybe still create the new mold of what fine dining is, because that as a category is now changing dramatically. And so, I mean, I think that to me is the biggest change, is the focus on that. And, you know, it has definitely over the last few years been taken to a point, you know, where it's gone to being all about the chef and, you know, some people, and not about the customer. And that was one of the things we thought a lot about when we opened Carbone, for example, which was the idea of the pendulum had swung so much, and it had probably started, you know, with Montrachet many years ago, and had swung so much towards, you know, chefs putting out a tasting menu, that's what you get, that's what we're gonna serve you, no choices, which we're guilty of doing as well, but you know, how do you take that and start the pendulum swinging back the other way in fine dining? And that's one of the things we did with Carbone, which was giving people choices, letting people make changes, letting people do it the way, you know, have a little bit more say in the way that they guide their experience and dine at the restaurant. So that's what I would say.
For me, I would say that, is my mic on? Yeah. I would say that I only have this generation. I don't have a big enough body of work. I have just what I'm doing right now. And even though I've been in New York and cooking professionally for 15 years in New York, for the first 10 of it, you don't even know what's happening outside of your station, like let alone the industry. Like you're so focused on just doing your job that you don't even really get a pulse of what's happening in the world. So it's my job to just to try to affect the current state and to be a student of the past, to be a historian, which is something I think we do a good job of. Is hitting the libraries, pulling old menus, seeing what these guys were doing, trying to get an understanding of what happened before me, because I don't know, I didn't live it. You know, even though 15 years ago I was in the city, I was doing just my station. I had my list, I had my thing, and I don't know what was going on. I had no idea. I had barely understood my task in the kitchen. So I only have this body of work, and I can my job to the future generations is to be a historian of the past.